Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Run It Back. My name is Remco Rinkema, and in that chair over there he is, Mr. Brian Rast, joining us today to watch the 2015 Super High Roller Bowl Final Table, the first of its kind. Definitely a special event to look back to, and we have the champ here with us to watch all of this. $7.5 million is what you won back in 2015. Brian Rast, first and foremost, how are you doing, and how often do you think back of that epic event?
I'm doing well. And how often do I think back? Not very often.
Good.
But it's a pleasant memory, so I'm happy to think back about it today.
Exactly. You told me that you haven't seen this in a very long time, which makes it even more exciting because we might get some new insights into how things played out at the final table. But first and foremost, I want to ask you, when this was announced, $500,000 buy-in, the field, the way it stacked up, 43 entries, what were your thoughts? Were you like, I got to get in this no matter what?
Well, hold on. Let me cut you off real fast right there because I just want to throw a shout out to my boy Andrew Roble, in case he ever ends up watching this, which is probably unlikely. But I busted him right on the final table bubble. It was unfortunate. He actually wasn't one of the shortest stacks, if I remember. I won a race with queens to ace king off, small favorite, kind of a cooler spot for him. And I got lucky, and kind of sucks because, he's a guy who played a ton of poker, is very good, successful, long-term, cash game, no limit, done great. Never really had a big tournament breakthrough, and I kind of chopped him off on that one. Getting lucky would have been a lot different if he wins that with ace king. I mean, I still would have had some chips, but he might have gone up to chip lead, and because I had a big chip lead for the whole way down, and that pot definitely helped out. But and I would have been back to the pack a bit.
Right, and we're looking at the chip counts right here. As we can see, you have that big chip lead over Seiver and Peters, who are pretty close together, and then a whole bunch, Seidel, Kuznetsov, Marchese, and Connor Drynan coming up the rear. Like I said, 7.5 million up top at this final table. Going back to my question, when it was announced, $500,000 buy-in, of course, a stacked field because a lot of top pros joined. What were your thoughts on the format and the stakes?
Well, so at the time that this tournament was going on, there's pretty much not a question that if it was a really big tournament, I was going to play. Now, it definitely helped out that almost all the really big tournaments were essentially in Las Vegas. I mean, the one drop, the years it was $1 million, this 500K. I mean, I could basically stay in Las Vegas and play a lot of the very biggest tournaments in the world. It changed after this. I never traveled a lot for tournaments, but, Kerry had that Aria series that ended up being pretty decent stakes, plus the WSOP stuff, plus some of the Super High Roller Bowl, even before it went international. And back in the day, even though I hadn't been a tournament player for a lot of my career, kind of was getting into it and could do it without traveling a bunch. So this was kind of right around the middle of right around my peak, like tournament playing. And during this time in my career, I was, kind of for the first time and haven't done it a little bit after I stopped and before I wasn't, but kind of doing just as much tournament as cash games.
Right. So look back.
I was always playing this event.
Right.
500K, no rake. I was going to play.
Right. So look back on the accomplishment as a whole for me. How much did it mean to you to win this and to have this on your resume? And of course, it was also a huge payout.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe my biggest win. It's hard to say. I mean, personally, the win that got me the most amped up when I did it is the only one that I really truly celebrated kind of after I won was the first poker player championship when I beat Phil Hellmuth. That was just something different. Wow. Well, what a suck out here by the 10-9 on the turn. But that one was on ESPN. That was my first kind of major win. Now I had won a bracelet earlier that summer, but it was on the side table. And it wasn't for, it was for way less money than that one. That one was for, the first one was, couple hundreds of thousands, something that wasn't that much different than a really good day in a high stakes cash game. But That was for almost 2 million. Bill Hellmuth on ESPN. Like everybody, I had a whole bunch of friends like watching in the audience. My parents. So that was just different and real celebration. Then again, this one, late like for a lot more money, right? I mean, this is like a 7.5 million. That's massive. I mean, I didn't have all of myself in this tournament, but yeah, it's hard to say career wise. Like, I definitely. I mean, I think this was a pretty big mark. It obviously ratcheted me up the tournament earnings at the time, pretty high. So
Looking at the field and the final table, compare yourself to some of these guys that are dedicated only to tournaments. We're looking at Murderer's Row right here: Connor, Timofey, and David Peters. How would you sort of rank yourself against the opposition? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel as they have a small edge? Do you feel like you have the upper hand because it's live? How do you look at that?
yeah. So I mean, first in the group we were saying it's a pretty different group. Like Timofey is not primarily a tournament player. I'm not sure exactly what he's doing recently, right? But he plays a lot of high stakes cash games as opposed to the other two guys. And I would say, kind of to answer your question, so being very realistic about what's happened with me in my poker career and kind of like when I was at my best in tournaments and whatever, I was really hit what I would say is my competitive peak now that I'm able to look back with some 2020 hindsight. And it was kind of like before people started using solvers. I mean, it's not that I never studied poker, but back in the day, you couldn't really solvers like legitimately give you kind of an answer. Like, this is the GTO way to play. Now you can deviate from that in order to exploit people, but that's a pretty good starting point, right? It's an actual mathematically based game theory optimal starting point. And the truth is No Limit Hold'em had been the main game that I played for a long, long time. And I was very good at it. I had, done some studying and reading about like what other people's theories were about how to play. But, a lot of those were only theories. It was like kind of what people thought. They weren't really mathematically based on game theory. And, I had some of my own theories. Like at the time, some people thought I was doing some wild stuff and whatever. And the truth is that there was a pretty nice period, probably from 2010 or before, and not all of it was in tournaments till, 4 or 5 years ago, which is around the time of this win, when I think I was one of the best live No Limit Hold'em players when you incorporated that along with kind of some of the other things that go into playing live, which is not giving off tells, getting a feel for your opponents, generally playing a little deeper oftentimes, but not always in tournaments, stuff like that. So, unsurprised, this tournament, big wins for me were happening around then. And those guys, I definitely felt, even to throw in more to answer your question, some of the tournament guys back in the day were like quite bad post flop compared to like what I thought the best players were playing. So even though post flop is a little bit less important in tournaments, like it still matters. And I thought there were a lot of spots on the flops and especially turns and rivers more than the flop where tournament guys were doing, they were doing just exploitable errors, like either under over bluffing, stuff like that, which, after GTO stuff came out, a lot of these guys, in my opinion, through a lot of hard work and studying, in addition to continuing to play, like really improved. And there's like a number of guys who I think if you go back 5 years or before and you kind of get before solvers, and then you're kind of looking at the last couple of years, like post solvers, like these guys have made massive improvements to their game and they play amazing now. And they're better No Limit Hold'em, definitely tournament players than me and probably No Limit Hold'em overall. And, it's definitely humbling to watch that improvement. And I don't want to say like I've never used solvers. I have PO Solver on my computer and I know how to use it, although not a lot of the advanced features, but I haven't spent like a lot of time on it.
Right.
So, and eventually that's kind of why I stopped playing No Limit Hold'em tournaments, like big, really competitive or anything, because in addition to not wanting to travel, that just wasn't what I wanted to do when I was getting into mixed games. So that's what I would say about a lot of those guys. And fortunately, 2015, when we're playing this tournament, is kind of around that moment where solvers really, I don't know the exact timeline with them, but like if they were around at this point, it hadn't been for very long. And I liked playing with a lot of those tournament guys, and a lot of the guys who I really thought were the best players at the time, the guys who I thought were the most dangerous, were guys that had more like live experience and cash game experience. So like, for example, Timofey,
right?
As opposed to the guys that were just tournament players, right? Like who you could see there.
Right.
Whereas like a lot of those guys who, let's say, were more just tournament players, like, Bonomo and Connor and Peters and like Jason Kuhn, that might not be true a couple years after this, right? And in fact, at some point, tournaments became bigger than cash because like the modern players, like they're playing 10 million plus buy-ins a year. Like cash game guys aren't getting that kind of volume, at least on online sites or whatever, because like those games are smaller than they used to be.
Right.
So now if I was a big no limit hold'em player, like maybe I would play tournaments because like that's where where you're going to get the most, be able to put the most money in.
We've seen some drastic changes over the last few years in that landscape, which is awesome. For the people who are just tuning in, this is a live show, so ask Brian Rast anything in the chat. We are watching the 2015 Super High Roller Bowl final table. I already see a lot of the familiar faces here in the chat on YouTube. We have Wisco Baron, as always, joining us. We have Kevin, we have Nick, we have John, Igor, Brad, and then on Facebook. It's pretty quiet on Facebook. Come on, guys, let's hear it. How are you guys enjoying yourselves? And please let me know where you are watching from. Always love to hear that. As the show goes on, we'll break down some of these hands that Brian has played at this final table, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty to dive into. You did mention that the only real big celebration was after your win in the 50K Players Championship. So are you then admitting that after this big $7 million win, you just went home and went to bed? Or was there actually some kind of event or party?
I think I did go out that night, but I mean like the immediate moment.
Right.
Right? Like as in right after it happens, just celebration. Like this one was pretty muted. I mean, I knew Scott personally, like we played a lot together. We had even, at this point I had started playing mix, although I hadn't, nearly had the kind of experience I have today and wasn't quite as good a player, but, Scott played mix too. And so, one of the first things I think I did after winning was kind of go, talk with Scott, like good match or whatever. And then, then went over to my rail, was pretty happy, but it's just different.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like after I won the 50K, my first thought wasn't to go not congratulate, but whatever you say.
Congratulations.
Good match, man, or whatever to Phil Hellmuth. My first thought was to jump up and down a bunch and go hug people on my rail.
Yeah.
Like no thought, what I'm saying? So yeah, it's some of that's also just the more, the less it charges you up afterwards, right? The first and the second. And by this time I had won a number of tournaments. And so even though this one was bigger, quote unquote, it's still kind of like, okay, it's another one. But then, as time goes on afterwards, I definitely went out that night and got drunk with a bunch of friends and had a good time and celebrated.
That's what we wanted to hear. A question from the chat. Igor is saying, I have a massive respect for Brian Rast, top 5 players in the world, according to Igor. And he's asking, what was the biggest cash pot you ever played, and did you win or did you lose it?
Biggest cash pot I ever played was, I believe I talked about this in an article before too, so it's out there somewhere. In maybe I was playing in a game in Aria. I think it was 2K, 4K, no limit hold'em. I was sitting directly to the left of a infamous player known as the Chairman. I believe he had me covered, and I had like somewhere between 1.5 and 2, like say 1.8. And basically, so it was probably around 3.5 million, and I won.
Wow.
He raised small blind. I 3-bet. He called. I had kings. Flop was like Jack 7-4 with a flush draw, I want to say. And he check raised me, and instead of calling, which would have been the more standard play, I decided to re-raise him, and we basically got it in on the flop. He only wanted to go one time. It came, the 4 was like the non-heart. It paired the 4 and came a 9, no flush. And after showing my hand, he ended up, I was really worried about a slow roll because he was kind of known for doing stuff like that. And eventually he mucked.
What did you have?
And when finally the hand was scooped, I was like relieved. And later, because he showed the people on the other side, I heard that his hand was 5-6 offsuit. So I needed to fade the 3 or the 8, apparently.
Wait, what did you have?
Kings.
Oh, kings.
Yeah. So I mean, it was kind of a wild-ish pot. I mean, I had a little over 400 big blinds, just a 3-bet, kind of like pounded the kings for value. But like he was a guy who he played pretty wild, man. I mean, his VPIP very high, very aggro, and I just decided to take a different line with him, and it ended up working out. I mean, got it in with the best of it, and luckily for me, I didn't lose the 30% or whatever he had.
So let me ask you this: for someone who's seen it all, who's been through it all, you've won tournaments, you've played cash for many, many years. Does your adrenaline go into the top of your head as you're waiting for him to either muck or slow roll you? Are you amped up at that moment, or are you still able to be calm?
I mean, outwardly, I'm definitely able to be calm at this point. I would say at that moment, after we had gotten all the money in and I was like kind of waiting, definitely was hitting some adrenaline, which isn't that common, right? Like, because like first, I did only have kings.
Right.
Even though the guy's a maniac, like it's not like I'm sitting there like, oh, I got this for sure, So I'm a little bit worried that I just put in a ton of money and don't have the best hand. We run it out. It's a pretty good run out for me. He was actually supposed to show first because not only, he was the last one to go all in and he's out of position, but he didn't show. And so I showed my hand because it's pretty good, right? Kings on a 4-4 whatever board. And, but yeah, like when I'm sitting there the whole time, like he didn't want to go once. Okay, no, okay. It is what it is. Let's go. Just definitely pretty amped up during the whole process, like waiting to see if I'm going to get slow rolled.
Oh my God.
Trying to keep it together. Yeah, I would say pretty amped up for that, but I don't know. I mean, I have so much experience sitting at a poker table that, it's a lot of that's going to just be internal.
Right, for sure. Joe is asking, and he's paraphrasing. He says, Luke Swartz said that you are one of the few guys who always plays his A game. Brian, are you an A game sort of average player, or do you have a B and a C game, and when does that come into play?
Well, that is awesome for Luke to say. I appreciate that. I mean, I think realistically speaking, I kind of agree mostly with the idea of what Luke's saying, that I think one of my strengths at the poker table is that more than most people, I'm playing, I wouldn't say my A game. I would say I play my B game or better more than most people. And by that, I mean, I don't tilt very much and I can stay pretty disciplined about like what I want to do and how I'm playing. Now I'm a little bit more critical than Luke because I know what's going on as opposed to like he's just looking from the outside. And there are some times where, listen, there's a difference between like my A game I consider when I'm like really focused and I'm like really paying attention to hands and watching other people, trying to get reads, trying to see how they're playing, trying to see if they're playing normal or not. And then other times when I'm there and I'm not tilted and this is what I'm calling my B game more, but I'm not necessarily paying super close attention, which is easy to do, right? Like everybody, we've all played poker. Probably most people watching this chat do. And there's times when you're clocking it in a little bit more, kind of just going with the way you regularly play things. You're not really watching hands. You're not really paying attention. And yeah, I would say that's more like my B game. But not, unlike most people, I think at this point I'm pretty good at controlling, let's call it like flying off the rails and actually having emotions affect my play. And usually that delves into C game or less territory. And in fact, one of the things I'm pretty happy or proud about in my poker career, it's like there have been a lot of times I've been in games like, so when I get stuck and it starts to get pretty big, if the game's not very good, actually a lot of times in recent years, I'll just quit. Because it's like, this is a game I could play tomorrow or the next time I come sit. It's like nothing special about this game. It's pretty tough. Right. And I'm a person who I tend to have like more like there's a lot of people who I think in poker kind of like put their opponents down a bit. Like, oh, I'm like definitely better than them. I actually have a lot of respect for a lot of my opponents. And, you know, but so it's like, if I'm, you know, losing, it's just not fun to be there. And if I know that's like where my mind is going, sometimes I'll just quit. But there's times when the game is pretty good for whatever reason. Either some people aren't playing that well, or there's, you know, a fish in the game or whatever. And in those instances, like I'll get stuck and I'll say, okay, well, this isn't fun, but like this is a good spot. So why don't you buckle up and keep going? And in my career, I have like a ton of big get outs. Like probably can't even count on two hands the number of times I've been down like 300 or 400K, you know, or more, and like basically gotten even or winner. And even one time, my biggest one was I was down just over a Milski and got out and got winner like 100,000 or something in a big cash game at the end of the World Series like 2 years ago. It was like, you know, it was like one of the hybrid games with like 100 cap, big bet and limit, like, you know, 12, 14 games. And then the game got even bigger because I think Aaron Katz wanted to gamble it up, and he was doing this like crazy game where he was giving out like, it was like running something kind of like 50K, you know, like 7 ways, but it divvied it up, I think, into 2 or 3 ways to win the pot. And he was giving out like a small amount of edge, like basically like paying 1,000 to do it. So like everyone was fine. Like, you know, at some point we just did like 20 or 30 of them in a row because he was flying home the next day and he wanted to gamble super hard. But I mean, I got stuck huge in that game. Like half of it or more was just these dumb flips where I was running bad. But I was like, okay, so I'm just getting paid to do these flips essentially. Like I'm earning something on it. Plus, like the game was pretty good. Right? That kind of game where people are gambling. I mean, you know, there tends to be people winning and losing and people's emotions get high. And that was my biggest get out. So, you know, I wouldn't say it's like my A game all the time. And that's but B gamer plus. Yeah. I think that's one of my strengths.
Right. All right. That's a really good answer. Shout out to everyone in the chat watching from all over the world. We have Canada in the house. We have Atlanta, San Antonio. We have Georgia. That's the country, Georgia. I appreciate you guys all watching. Let's hear it. Keep it coming. We have Northern California in the house. And Brian says he's not on fire. That's Brian from Northern California. Appreciate that. It's been rough with all those forest fires. The question coming in from Brad, Brian, which I'm very curious about. And please interrupt.
Wait, hold on. I think this is a hand I actually play.
Okay.
And I believe I like bluff the flopper turn on this one.
All right.
So Peters opens. I actually don't like Peters opens here. He's in either the cutoff or no, he's in the hijack with Jack 9 off. And he has a decent amount of chips, but I'm the chip leader in position. And I think Tom, you know, on the button, this is a bad open. I flat King 7 suited because I'm the chip leader, and a guy with a ton of chips in the hijack opened. Yeah, I think an ace comes on the turn and I fire again. He check calls, which is standard, and then it's pretty hard to continue on the turn. So, I mean, it's not like he could do anything, but yeah, I can't see his open being good here. Yes, I remembered the hand. Look at that, ace on the turn. And this is like a great hand to semi-bluff with. And, you know, I end up taking it down. So I approve of the way I played this hand. I think Peters played it good post-flop, you know, check call, check fold. But his open cannot be a good one. In the hijack, definitely a GTO, Jack 9 off is not an open.
Right.
And when you have the chip leader on the button, I don't know.
It's cool that you remembered it, and please interrupt me or yourself if you see a hand that you want to break down on this feed. For the people who are just tuning in, we are watching the 2015 Super High Roller Bowl final table. If you don't want to listen to myself or Brian talk, go to PokerGO.com right now to watch this entire event from day one through the final table on demand whenever you want. It's an awesome event. It was the first of its kind. 7.5 million up top. There's Mr. Valedictorian on the screen. We have some more questions coming in from the chat. One of the ones that I want to ask.
Yeah, the tale of two cities right there.
Yeah.
High school valedictorian.
And college dropout.
Went to university, didn't graduate. You know, like.
Yeah, but I think you end up doing all right. Brad Taylor is asking, Rast, you always seemed chummy with Phil Lock. Tell us your best non-poker Phil Lock moment. You must have some Phil Lock moments because that guy is a riot.
Yeah, no, Phil's I met Phil, who knows, 12, 13 years ago at this point, something like that. Let's say 13 years ago. You know, probably the most memorable Phil Lock moments type of thing were Phil had been bothering me to like go to Brazil. Like I'd never been to Brazil. And Phil, well, not bothering, but it's like Phil and I hung out a lot. We were good friends. You know, I kind of met Antonio after befriending Phil, and then, you know, Antonio was actually in Vegas, whereas Phil was in LA. But he's bothering me to go to Brazil. Just like, listen, I've been to Brazil sometimes for some backgammon stuff for this. Brazil's like an awesome country. We'll have a good time. So eventually, I go with him, and I mean, I met my wife on that trip. So. Wow. You know, we're down in Brazil. We're traveling around a little bit, and then we were there for 2 weeks. The last week was at Rio, and you know, I met my wife in Rio. One of the nights, like, you know, we kind of went out and had some drinks, and you know, so there it was. I'm traveling around Brazil for 2 weeks with Phil Lock. We're having a good time, and I meet my wife.
Is Phil Lock the same person at the airport, in the cab, at the club, as we know him on TV?
Yes. Yeah. It's not an act. I would say there's times when it's like a little bit more manic than others. But that can happen not in front of the TV. Like I would say in front of the TV or in front of the camera, whatever, he tends to be a little more manic than other times. Like just like high energy with it is what I mean by manic. But yeah, that's not like a different person. Like, it's not like you'd see him off camera and you'd be like, oh, wow, like this is Phil Lock in real life. This is totally different. No, you know, it's that is who he is. He's a little bit zany, a little bit, you know, different with the way he thinks about things, even the way he talks about them. His speech is different too, the way he speaks. But that kind of like zany energy and little like, from left field, but at the same time, you listen to him and okay, like this isn't an idiot. This is a guy who's pretty intelligent and thinking about what he's saying is just different than most people are thinking about, right? That's Phil. That's who he is. That's who he is off camera. So yeah, he's a lot of fun, and you know, he's one of those people who, in addition to, you know, being intelligent, interesting, kind of fun to hang out with, you know, he just has a pretty good positive energy about most things in life, which makes him fun to be around. Like, he's not a negative person.
Let's break this hand down real quick. Marchese raises with ace king. You flat with ace queen. Timofey wakes up with king.
Yeah. This hand, I get away from this one. I didn't 3-bet Marchese. And it ends up costing me basically about the least it could ever cost me. Turns out, I believe, based on a lot of GTO preflop solutions for like these kind of stack depths, actually flatting ace queen off here is oftentimes preferred to 3-betting.
Huh. Interesting.
So I think I actually make a pretty good play, because exactly one of the things having these type of situations come up and you get away is good. So I'm annoyed here, but probably just taking my time, because it's different, because Marchese going all in. Like I probably call Timofey, right, his shove and Marchese's full, but Marchese then going all in with me behind him think ace queen off is too light, and I find the right play. I'm always the type of guy who's like way more painful folding than calling. I like putting the money in. So, you know, I definitely, when it gets back to it, it's not an amazing fold. I'm just happy about it.
You're pumped. Like you're high-fiving the rail over the ace queen fold. It's almost as if you get more satisfaction out of making a good fold than a good call.
No, not necessarily. I just got a lot of satisfaction about saving money there.
Right.
Just making a good play, you know. And for me, sometimes it can feel that way because a lot of times throughout my career, I was a bit on the sticky side, right? In fact, when I was younger, like this young and even younger, I was definitely known as more as like a guy who played a bit crazy and didn't like to fold, right? I'd say that's probably less my reputation, you know, nowadays because I'm an old man and then it's just like kind of time comes for people. But yeah, when I was, you know, 10 years ago, if you were to go talk to people who played No Limit Hold'em with me, I had a very loose aggressive style. So, you know, even so, I just making a good fold for me. It's like it was always nice because that's a little bit against, say, my regular way of playing. So it felt good, better than like making a big call. Where yeah, I'm right, but when you're a guy who puts money in, like making big calls happens. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So.
C. O'Brien from Austin, Texas, is wondering what your experience was like moving up the stakes, and you know, as a tail end to that question, what advice would you have for people who want to do that themselves?
When I started playing, I moved up the stakes pretty fast. First summer I played poker, I made $20K. I had by the time I dropped out of college, I think I basically had a $100K bankroll and never really dropped below that again. I would say the next bit is when I started to kind of like run into problems. I'd say trying to move up past like 10, 20 live. So like maybe 2550, but larger than 2550 live. So 50, 100 or bigger. And then online, whatever the corresponding, you know, maybe 2550 online or more. The competition started to get really tough back then. Those were a lot of like the biggest regular games you could play, public games. And, you know, there was a while when I was kind of a decently high stakes player, but not playing like the very biggest games. And there was some years where I was like oscillating in there. And, you know, I moved out to Vegas, and one of the things that just really helped me was, and it's going to be different than today. But basically back then, once you got as good as I was, and I wasn't even one of the very top guys when we're talking about, I was just like a winning cash game player in pretty big games, but not the biggest. Like there weren't books that could help you back then. Like there were some books, but they're more helping beginner, maybe intermediate players. But by the time you're even like you basically know everything that's out there publicly. So it's kind of about learning and improving on your own, which is by doing and thinking about it. And then the thing that really helped me was meeting some other good players and kind of just talking poker with them. And I think one of the things you find when you're doing that is that so you talk hands with somebody and he'll point out something that you didn't even think was a mistake. And that's oftentimes where like kind of the biggest leaps come, is like somebody else who's good, who is analyzing a hand or talking with you, says, oh, like, you know, you say something and you did this certain thing pre-flop. This is, you know, for me. And he's like, I wouldn't have even played that pre-flop. And I wasn't even thinking about that, right? I'm thinking about the spot on the river, which is why I'm telling him the hand. But then he's like, yeah, I think that's like way too loose pre-flop. But, you know, if you did that, then, and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I guess I can kind of see that. See what he's saying there. And then that's when you start making some big adjustments. Like, you know, for me, one of them was I was a bit of a kind of a spew monkey, lagtard early. And, you know, my friend Keith Gibson in Vegas, he was a kind of a nit. And so it's like, interestingly enough, we became, you know, we've been good friends, and he was the guy I talked the most poker with, which is kind of funny to people back in the day because we were like very different with our styles, but probably ended up helping us both out because he had a much more like solid perspective on the game, and I had a much more wild one. And I probably helped open him up, and he probably helped batten down my hatches, so to speak. And but that was the process of improving. Now, obviously, today, given that you can just get solver outputs for like the right GTO way to play, it's a bit different. Now, you probably obviously want a mentor or somebody really good and experienced to say, okay, well, not only is this the right GTO way to play, this is how you should apply it, but then how are you going to notice when people are deviating from GTO, and what does that mean, and then how do you exploit it? Because exploiting is still a thing. Like, you can learn GTO, but nobody is playing GTO perfectly, and definitely not probably people who aren't the very top players, and they're still going to want to exploit them. But that process is going to be a bit different, because like back in the day when I was learning, we didn't really have GTO. You kind of felt what somebody was doing wrong, and then you exploited it, right? As opposed to now, you can actually learn the GTO and this is how often. But similar ideas.
Big all in here. David Peters with the Kings against Connor's Ace 10.
Now, or he is out in fifth.
Oh my God!
Wow! Red 10 on the river. What a card!
And I'd be suspicious.
That's pretty sick.
Running tens. By the way, for the people who've never seen this final table, you got to stay and watch, because the end of this event is just hysterical. Pocket eights are involved quite a few times. I just remembered that from being here while this tournament was being played out, how epic some of the runouts were, and this was of course one of them. If you like what you're watching, please hit the like button. Really appreciate it. Keep those questions coming. There's tons of questions. Bruce is asking on Facebook something that we discussed earlier, so Bruce, please go and skip back, and Brian tells a story of the biggest pot he's ever won. That's a great one. Dave Nichols comes in again after asking this question last week. He also wants to know your answer to this, Brian. Let this one simmer in your mind, Brian, as we pivot topics, because this might take you a while to figure out. He wants to know, what is your Mount Rushmore of No Limit Hold'em? So let that simmer for a bit. See if you have any names, and we can come back to that later in the show, because that's probably quite a complicated question. There's another question that came in, and I can't really find it right now, but I remember seeing it. Would you advise a mid-stakes player to get into mixed games? Or would you say there's not enough opportunities to move up the stakes and to make a good living, because most of the games are either very small or very big and not much in between?
So I don't know a lot about, say, the mixed game ecosystem, even though I play a lot of mixed games, because really, like, the way I got into mixed games was kind of like, I was playing the biggest no limit and PLO games. I had a lot of money, and I just kind of jumped in the biggest mixed games. I'd say at the beginning, when I first started playing in Bobby's room, I probably wasn't winning, but I was taking my shots, and at the time, really far ahead of that game in no limit and PLO. And I was trying to overcome that through a lot of the other rounds. I had some of the mixed games I was decent in, like Limit Hold'em and Limit 08. And then, a lot of the other games, like the up card games, I was pretty awful. And so, it was what it was. And, but so I don't really know, because I don't really know what's happening below that. And I never did. Kind of avoiding that part of the question is this. I think in poker and in anything in life, you need to kind of approach it from like, what's going to make me the most happy and motivated in order to do it? Because you got to realize, like, it's one thing to say, okay, well, like, this is how I'm going to make the most money. And if that's really what's going to motivate you, great. Then you need to like look into that answer. And I'm not going to have that answer for you for a mid-stakes guy. But it's like, for me, like, I can tell you in my poker career, I always enjoyed learning new things, which is why I kind of always started learning new games. I'm very intellectually curious, and it was fun to like play new games. It's very challenging, right? Rather than just keep doing the same thing. And additionally, at some point, like after the solvers started coming out in No Limit Hold'em, I really loved the idea that in mixed games, there still weren't answers. Like for me, my favorite way to play poker, what I really got into it for, was that, like you could go sit down at the table, and it was kind of like you against these other guys, thinking, who's got not only the best, baseline or overall strategy about how to play, but then during the course of the game or the sessions, or just, you could play someone for years, like who makes better adjustments, right? because that's a big part of it too, is exploiting the other people you're playing with. Like, what does he do wrong and how do you take advantage of it? Like, what does he think about you and how do you take advantage of it? So I always loved that aspect of poker, and I think it's definitely the most pure when, before solvers, before answers, before like legit mathematical answers, it was the most pure. And so that was one of the things, not only did my curiosity and whatever get me into mixed games and PLO before that, because I was one of the earlier no limit players to jump over to PLO, it kind of kept me there because as solvers were, becoming so standard in no limit hold'em, like they weren't there for mixed games. So it was like I was going and playing games and it was still like, okay, you got all these different games. There isn't really the answer. And so I'm playing with these people and it was more like what the old school no limit hold'em felt for me. So it's like, I would say today that's still pretty much true about about mixed games. So if you like that style of poker where you're going, and the best way to get better is really to play and then think about the hands that you play, then you should play mixed games and you'll figure out what limits to play at. But if you like studying, so like if I was going to really play no limit hold'em seriously today, which I'm not ruling out, who knows, maybe I make a comeback. I mean, I'm still a very good no limit hold'em player, and I know what I would have to do to become an elite no limit hold'em player again, and I'm pretty sure I could do it. I take very good care of myself, physically, mentally, and I'm sure I could jump back in there again. But I know like that process would be, I would have to spend, I would say, at least minimum half my time studying, because like to play good no limit hold'em today, you have to learn and be able to reproduce and like think at the moment of GTO, which means like studying a bunch of spots, trying to find the patterns and whatever. And then the next step is once you can replicate GTO at various stack sizes, you then think about how for deviations to exploit people. Now that like I'm already kind of used to because I've been doing that for a very long time. So that would be natural. But I'm just saying, so that those are two different processes. Because today I would say if you're a pretty good poker player and you want to play mixed games, like you're not spending half your time studying. Just like back in the day, you weren't doing that for no limit hold'em either. And if you were doing something wrong, because experience and then thinking about it was way more important. With no limit hold'em today, like, not only do I agree with it, but even from, I'm friends with some of the guys who are, probably like the top no limit hold'em tournament players today. And in particular, one guy who I talk a bit with, and, Jason Kuhn, he talks about the amount of time he spends studying, which is different than the way I think it used to be. Back like say 2015 in this tournament or before, when that wasn't really the approach you would take.
Right.
So to me, that's kind of the answer to the question, because the way to like have sustainable long-term success is to be kind of like find the niche, whether it's a niche or not, but that idea of like what you enjoy doing and what you're going to get out of it in poker. So if that process of playing multiple games, having that challenge, but also kind of like more not having the answer and it being more on your own play and thinking about it, maybe talking to people, that's going to be the mixed game approach right now. But if if that's what you want, go for mixed games. If what you want is like, hey, I want to be able to kind of study, spend a lot of time doing that, and then replicate and improve on that at the tables, and that's going to be maybe more no limit hold'em and even to a certain extent PLO now. And that's the answer.
Right. So as far as your own play, and 2020 has been a strange year, do you miss driving to Bellagio and Aria? Do you miss the live action, or is it also nice? You have a family. Is it also nice to be home for a change?
Yeah, man, I miss the action. I've played the least amount of poker this year. I probably played since I started. I enjoy playing live. I definitely miss the mixed games, going off here and there. Like a lot of the way in the last year or two would be is it wasn't like every day there was a game, but some people would be in town and we'd have a game for a week or 2 weeks or even just a weekend. And that would happen like somewhat regularly. So it'd be nice because like you play for a bit, you're off for a bit, you play for a bit, you're off for a bit, but there's regular playing. And then there's a few periods of the year where, there's a game every day. So like during the summer, there's a game every day for 2 months. During December, there's a game every day for a month. So you got 2 or 3 months there where there's a game every day. And then in the off season, there'll be, anywhere from, let's say, the lowest maybe 6 or 7 to the highest like 15 or more, games in a month. So it's like as much as every other day or more, as little as, twice a week, or 1 to 2 times a week, depending on the month. But I like that. And this year it hasn't been like that at all. In fact, I haven't played live poker since February or end of February or something. As maybe it was like the first day of March last time I looked in my phone to try to remember. So yeah, I mean, that kind of sucks. And, my family, like our son is in Brazil trying to play soccer. So, we don't really have a baby. So there hasn't been as much family stuff to do. I've spent some time doing some other things, but yeah, I miss poker, and
Right.
I'm ready to play live again.
I would love to see that in 2021. It's a strange year, so we'll just wait and see what happens. Here we have 2 pair versus a turn straight. Give us some thoughts here on this one. Interesting spot as well for Scott.
Man, I didn't see what happened on the flop.
Let's go back. So it's 300K from you from the hijack, I think, or is it under the gun? Oh no, wait.
No, yeah, I'm hijack.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is I'm chip leader. This is a
No,
fine-handed open. Scott's flat is a little loose, but I guess he's just like, I'm gonna tango with Brian in position here. I think Scott's second in chips.
I think it's small blind, big blind actually, because of the it's four-handed. We're four-handed.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, then this hand, that's super standard then.
Yeah. So you continue.
So I think King 7 here is a pretty good continuation bet. Obviously King high, you want to fold, kind of have a double gutter, get ace highs to fold. Pretty reasonable. You could check call also. Scott calls. Turn is tough. I think this is a spot where, I mean, I now have the straight. Scott didn't 3-bet me. He almost never has ace king. Pretty much looking at the nuts at this point. Like maybe he's chopping. I think it's a spot where I'm going to be able to find bluffs as well between club draws, maybe some ace high hands, possibly some other things that are a little weaker that I turn into bluffs, like a 9, although I'm not that likely to have a 9 given the flop play. So I think it's pretty standard so far. I believe here I do something weird. Not sure I like my play here. I make a big bet.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know exactly how much Scott has. I don't know if he even has, if that's what he has or not.
Yeah, that's what he has.
Yeah. So I mean, as you can see, he basically had 2 pair there. So if he paired and made the boat, the flip side is that I thought that I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking. The play was a little wild. I might have been thinking that, I'm not sure if I'm thinking I might even get him to fold a chop. I'm not sure if I'm thinking maybe I'm getting him to call with like an 8. I could have been thinking this is a good, like if I'm getting him to fold an 8 and maybe even the chop, then this is what I would do with all my bluffs. I don't know. Personally, I think the better play would have been to check the river there. And because obviously, like, I'm betting the turn, I bet pretty decently. I feel like I'm sort of repping a straight, and now the board paired, right? It's a change. So the natural play, I think, is to check. And with a hand as good as mine, like, let Scott bluff his missed clubs or his 2 pairs like the one he had that didn't boat, and then probably call, which Scott might have done, right? So I think I made a bad play. I don't like that play. Not sure what I was thinking.
So for the people watching, I want to emphasize that even the best players in the world sometimes look back on plays and admit, that they've made a mistake. That's probably one of the biggest things that you can have in your poker game is the ability to analyze yourself and to adjust based on what you see, what you did, and make a different decision. Here we go with the ace king. You make a raise, you get a caller, and Timofey makes it 775. You shove on him, and he throws it into the muck. So another one for you.
Bad timing for Timofey. I mean, I have ace king. He just ran into the wrong hand for his 3-bet. I mean, 9-8 off is probably not a hand a solver would recommend 3-betting. I would guess there, especially if he was like the big blind, he can just call. But, Timofey was probably thinking he could, my guess is he was thinking he could 3-bet more than normal. I'm not sure.
The beauty as well is that we, the people watching the show, have been learning from, people like yourself and others as well. So we've been learning about, what are good cards to bluff with. And I learned recently about the element of removal and having cards that, are good to bluff with because they block other cards that people could have because of, let's say, you have, ace 10. It's a good hand, but it's also good because it blocks the ace of the opponent.
Yeah, I would say my guess there is, because this is 2015, so there weren't really solvers, right? Like solvers would recommend a slightly different, group of hands. But the idea that Timofey had that was very much correct is that we might have had too big stack size, but his stack was, I don't know, but let's say it's only like 30 blinds. That's a pretty good stack to, at that point, you're making some large out of position 3-bets from the blinds to an amount that, like, if both of us have marginal hands, we're going to fold. And you're taking some hands that kind of have marginal call value and sort of like, they're not like your worst hands. Like you're not doing it with like deuce 8 offsuit. Like you just fold that. But they're hands that like are probably good enough to play, but now you're like kind of turning them into bluffs. So, his idea was a reasonable one. I think modern solvers would not do it with 9-8 off. In fact, especially if he was the big blind, they would be pretty happy to just call. But, his idea is a good one. And Timofey was always has been, and especially back in the day before solvers, a creative, aggressive player who can be very tough to play against because he's very creative. And, that's what he was doing there. I didn't do anything special. I had ace king, and what else am I going to do with it?
Yeah. Very strange question coming in from I Am the Dax on YouTube. This is way out of left field. He says, would you live in Memphis and manage an Applebee's for 40 hours a week with 3 weeks vacation for 5 years, getting paid $6 million a year?
Wow, $6 million a year. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I guess. So I manage an Applebee's for 40 hours a week. The answer is probably yes. It's probably enough money that I couldn't pass that up. I'd have to think about like, do I have to, these funny thing is like, I always talk about like, these are lot and thinks and, with friends always like there's Antonio, like these kind of like random bets and like the lot and thinks of the answer of like what's the amount of money they would do it for. Do I have to stay in Memphis for the entire 5 years without leaving once?
No, you get 3 weeks vacation a year.
Oh, yeah, I'm doing that then. 3 weeks I can spend out $30 like risk free. 30 million is live luxuriously retirement money. Right. So like you can live, you're spending $1 million a year, which is luxurious living, or even 500 to $1 million, whatever. And I'm 38, so plus what I got, that's covering easily the rest of my lifetime. So I think I got to take that. Won't be that stimulating. But $6 million was high enough to get it done.
Exactly. So look out. If you're in Memphis, Brian Rast might show up at some point to manage the local Applebee's. Let's see if we can get this going.
Let's set this up, buddy. Come on.
Are
we just talking theoretical here? That was really randomly specific.
Yeah, I feel as though maybe Brad owns an Applebee's, or I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see how this plays out. We have a question. We have a question from Lap on YouTube. He says, "How does Rast feel about Phil beating his boy Antonio in high stakes duel?"
I don't even know. Phil Hellmuth.
Yes.
Okay, because I was like thinking Phil Locke.
Oh, no. Antonio, of course, losing the round 1 and 2 of high stakes duel.
So here's the thing. I didn't watch it at all, I have to admit. So I don't know what to think about the poker play. So I can't give you a comment. I know that I definitely would have, there was definitely the kind of feeling or experience based on the way Antonio definitely talked about it, but even Phil's kind of complaining that in a lot of spots in regular tournaments or in TV poker before, Antonio had held over Phil, quote unquote. But if that was the reputation or even the reality, probably changed during this. I'm closer, Antonio's a good friend of mine, and I'm friendly with Phil, but like we're not friends. So, sucks for my buddy, I guess, that he got spanked on TV poker 2 times in a row. Heard it was a fun match. I saw people tweeting like, hey, this is cool. I don't know. I don't have too much thoughts. I mean, it's like 2 live heads-up matches. Probably had a pretty shortish fun but shortish structure. Probably made for good watching. Not sure how much I'd get out of it. And if there was anything I would extrapolate out it, I don't have it because I didn't watch.
So then let me ask you this. They are coming back for round 3 in October. It's a $400,000 match they're playing for. If Phil wins, he wins high stakes duel and he takes the money. If Antonio wins, we move on to the next round and then Phil gets a chance to re-challenge him. Let me ask you this simple question. Handicap this for me. What's the betting line based on how you know them both as heads up players?
I mean, honestly, I have no idea. Like I said, I'd really have to watch those 2 matches, I think, to get a good idea. I mean, truth is that neither one is really a heads up player. Right? I mean, both of them are essentially live ring game players who play, in Phil's case, only tournaments, which are very rarely heads up. In Antonio's case, a lot of cash and tournaments, but rarely heads up. So how they are heads up versus each other, right? I mean, my thinking going into the match based on would be to give Antonio the advantage. But, obviously Phil's won 2. So I'd have to go back and watch to see is that because, Phil's got some good reads on Antonio? Is Antonio getting unlucky? So I don't know. So just off my cuff, I'd make it, pretty close to even money. But I could, which would be leaning it towards Phil because he's kind of 1-2. Because normally I would have gone in thinking Antonio was a favorite of some sort. So that would be my thinking on it, right? So not too sure.
Wow, so pretty close match heading into the next round of high stakes duel. You guys stay tuned to PokerGO and all our social channels for more on that. It's going to be an epic couple of hours of action in that round, and it's for $400K, so it's massive. We're 3-handed here. Super High Roller Bowl 2015. It's a Connor Drine and Brian Rast and Scott Seiver playing for $7.5 million. Chime in if you remember anything or if this hand is anything in particular. I'm going to see.
Yeah, so I think I win this hand. Or no, maybe not. But this hand is pretty standard. He opens the button with 10s. I have king 10 off. I think it's good enough to play small blind for a small open. I think calling is fine. Now I check. I think I continue here to just under half pot size bet. I think this is a fold here without a backdoor flush draw. I think this is a little too loose, but this is exactly it's not awful, but it's a little on the sticky side. This is definitely how I used to play quite a bit.
As we see this hand develop, what I'm also curious about is if you were to be on high stakes duel, which nemesis or which player would make for the most entertaining match? Brian Rast versus who would be the coolest match to have in this heads up format?
So what am I doing here? I feel like I should be bluffing, and that this is a bad check. So it's funny in this tournament. I mean, I even had some hands that I'm pretty sure they didn't record where I was like very happy with how I played them. Like I had a lot of good exploits. They didn't show it, but I had some pretty good pre-flop 3-bets that got through and whatever. But I make some errors. I would say, wow, I call here. Okay, I went with the check call. Yeah, I'm not that happy with how I played this. This is not a hand I'm gonna write home about here. I think the flop call's too loose, and I think given how I played it, I should probably be bluffing river. I think king high on the river is about pretty close to the worst I can get there with. I mean, maybe I can get there with queen high. Possibly 10 high for the 10-8 suited with the backdoor flush draw on the flop type of thing. But yeah. It's okay. It's okay, Brian. You end up all right in this one.
Exactly. But back to my question: high stakes duel, Brian Rast. Who are we facing? Which nemesis or which player would make for the most entertaining game, or who would you like to beat the most?
Wow, for me?
Yep, for you.
Who would I like to play in high stakes duel? I mean, I'll tell you what. Maybe I'll take Phil Hellmuth if he beats my buddy Antonio.
Oh wow! Well, there you have it. Phil Hellmuth is got another.
He wants to keep doing it, someone's got to stay.
Well, the thing is, if you win 3 matches,
Phil can run back the Poker Players Championship loss versus me.
Exactly, but if he wins this round against Antonio, he does lock up the cash because 3 wins in a row. That means you're the champ. But then, of course, we go back to round 1. So perhaps you can then be the fresh challenger for for Phil. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's see what else we got going here. We have you in a hand against Seiver making 3 of a kind, and he makes a straight. This is kind of interesting.
Yes. So this is a hand where I kind of get coolered, but I don't. I believe I check called and check raise river, I think. I think my hand is it's pretty close on the river to do it for value, but sort of I'm okay with this hand.
So I
get coolered on this one with the 6 on the turn versus the gutty, and I'm going to lose a big pot. But I believe it goes limp check, and a number of the hands that, pocket 9s, pocket kings, maybe king 7 suited, but very likely like ace 7 suited or possibly ace 7 off. Seiver raises versus my limp, right? So it's a somewhat thin check raise for value here, but I think reasonable. It's just about the worst hand that I would want to do it with, but if he's going to be betting, all worst 3 of a kind 7s this way, he could have some king X hands that he was kind of bluffing, like king 8, king 10, king whatever that he floated with, that now betting the river for value. Obviously, I'm losing to straights and boats. I'm blocking the 7, but there's the 2 straights or whatever. But I think this play is fine.
So you happen to run into a straight of Scott and
yeah. It's I think this play is okay. Not necessarily the line, I should always take. But it's like I have a lot of experience with Scott here. So there's a lot of other things. And I know I played a lot of big pots in cash games where I had run big bluffs in weird spots versus him. I played hands aggressively. So Scott's going to be a person more than like other people at this table where I might not play it this way versus Connor or a lot of other people at the table because this is thin. But I know Scott knows that I not only do I make big bluffs, turn hands into bluffs, but because of that I can do, let's say, reasonable value stuff, but that would be thin. So like I'm not making this play versus Connor. I'm probably taking a different line. But versus Scott, I kind of decided I would do this very likely on the turn, given the sizings and whatever. Now, that said, Scott made a big bet on the river, so I maybe should have thought twice. I could have maybe read into that and thought twice and just decided to call. but I think this hand is okay. Like, unlike the other two hands I played where I'm like, definitely train was going off the tracks here. Like, this hand I think is reasonable on my part. I don't remember his exact river size. It seemed pretty big at 1.1, and I maybe could have decided to just call, kind of like made a read about that. I think I had kind of decided on the turn that on brick rivers I was going to check raise and like still went with it. Maybe could have gotten away from that because of his river sizing, but I think that hand was reasonable.
In this situation right now, you are sitting on 4.8 million. Connor has 4 million, and Scott Seiver has 12.7. So a long way, a long ways away from being the champ, and that's what makes the last bit of this final table so highly entertaining with the way it played out.
I mean, this was kind of the thing about like my old style of playing is, you know, I mean, I think I did a lot of creative things back in the day. And I think most people that probably played with me from, 2017 or 16, kind of around the end of when I played a lot of tournaments, but especially back down to 2011 and really the pre-solver time, like 2015 to 2011, I think people would say I was like a very creative, tough opponent who did just a lot of like tricky things, and it was very hard to put me on a hand. And that was like kind of one of the things I had going for me. So, there were definitely times I ran off the tracks, but the flip side is it earned me a lot versus people. And there were a lot of times I would play in games and I could just tell people didn't want to deal with me. Right. So because I was just generally ready to do some crazy shit. So, it can work in your favor too. Now, unfortunately, like after GTO, people just kind of learn like this is the right way to play and they're okay doing it. But pre-GTO, that was kind of my style. And, not only do my results kind of speak for themselves, I mean, I think if you went and asked a lot of very good no limit hold'em players, especially guys who played cash too, if you went back to 2015 and before, I think people would speak highly about my game. I don't know. Who knows? But I definitely felt very good in a lot of these spots, and there was a reason why I was playing all the biggest buy-in tournaments. And not only did I play these tournaments, but back then I played any of the biggest no-limit cash games I would get into. So,
in this hand,
as you can see in this hand, this is where my reputation and my crazy shit works out. Like Scott calls a raise on the flop with King 9. Like I play this hand. Now, actually, I really think what I should have done here is check that back. I had made a read on the flop. Well, I decided to play this. Well, never mind. I'm okay with what I did. I think if Scott had, honestly, like he's thinking about calling me here with King 9. If he had a better hand, he probably calls me and I get max value. I think this is a bit me looking at the cards and saying like I should check it back. I take it back. But as you can see, like he called a raise on the flop with King 9. Probably was never calling me, but would have called a better hand. I actually think with specifically King Jack there and my stack size, it is a reasonable play to check back turn, give free cards to a bunch of hands which are probably drawing dead or at most have 4 outs. And, because there's only less than a pot size bet left, and allow Scott to maybe bluff some rivers. Or it's not like I need to bet there for value to get more in, right? Because there's really only one pot size bet left. So I think King Jack's actually a very good hand to check back and kind of simulate the because what am I doing on the flop there in Queen 10-9? It's a pretty reasonable flop that's connected to like take a shot and bluff raise. And Scott knows I'm doing it. It's part of the reason why he calls King 9. And King Jack's actually a great hand to then check back because it's the highest straight. So if he has hands like King 9, like he's drawing to tie me there for his gut shot draws. If he has a jack, he's only drawing to tie me. He can't beat the King Jack straight. So because a lot of his hands that have kind of draw equity that he's calling on the flop are only drawing to beat me, it's kind of a great hand to check back and simulate like the flop raise bluff. So even though I think the way I played that is reasonable, I do think it's kind of like a next level, flop raise check back spot, especially versus someone who's going to be light there like Scott. So that's kind of why I said that. It's a little bit also I can see the hand, and obviously checking back would have worked out better. But.
Right. Let me pivot into something else that I got a question via direct message, and I'm also curious about this as well. You've done a lot of prop bets over the years, and the bike bet was one. You've done a fight, all sorts of different stuff. What I'm wondering is, what is the toughest prop bet that you ever did, and win or lose, and what's the story behind it?
I mean, that's pretty easy. So first, definitely, let me send the link. Can you put a link out?
I can.
I want to link.
I want
to link something so people can read about this.
I'll add it to the description of the
add it to
video.
the description.
Yeah.
Okay. On my blog, brianrast.com, space blog link. I made 2 blog posts later in the year after this happened, but there was basically a series of 3 bike bets where I won all 3 bets. The first was a bet on Dan Bilzerian's bike challenge. The next was a bike bet. Somebody bet me, but then they bought out. And I had hired Dan to be my coach and give him like 25% of the action. But I had like 5 days. So coach wasn't really the right word. To manage it, Dan had just done the bet. It was similar to his, but not the same. Basically going to get equipment, his coaches, everything. He was going to set it up. Guy buys out for like 40% of what I would win. Like big buyout. Give Dan the 25%. The next day we have a barbecue at my house, and Dan bets me. And now that bet is going to be very similar to what Dan did. The same thing that Dan did, but I didn't have 5 weeks to train. I had only trained twice, 2 days earlier that week for the previous bike bet. And I wasn't going to be able to use a recumbent bike. I could only use a road bike to go 300 miles from Vegas to LA. And I couldn't draft, which was something Dan did in his challenge, drafting behind a car, which is a little dangerous, but makes it a lot easier. And basically the next day there was like a 6-8 hour period where I was biking into 20 to 30 mile per hour headwind, which was insane, difficult. I'm not an athlete. And this challenge it was like just over 300 miles. I had only 48 hours on a road bike. I had basically never even used a road bike until, earlier that week. I had never biked more than probably 10 miles earlier that week. I did do like a 20, 25 mile bike on one of those 2 days I was training. Yeah, that was the single toughest thing I ever did. I pushed myself literally the farthest I could go. My body was pretty broke down for 2 to 4 weeks after that, various kind of like injuries healing. During the course of that, like I had to get like a doctor met me on the road 75% of the way through when I was like getting near LA. I had to get a cortisone shot. My knee was like killing me. I needed cortisone to like help deal with the pain. I had already taken painkillers. I had not even slept that much the night before I began, much less barely slept at all as I'm doing the challenge, obviously. So I'm super tired. I had taken an Adderall. It was pretty hot in LA. I had like a panic attack as it was like overheating. I thought I was having a heart attack at the time. I just barely finished that. And it was the toughest thing I had done. It was one of those things where I was super proud I had shipped that. I had put 100% into it and got it done. Literally the guy who was Dan's coach, who was going to help coach me on mine, but then, on the one that was bought out, after I make the bet with Dan, he tells me I'm 0% to do this after he looked at the win map. But I might as well give it a college try. I tried to buy out with Dan and Bill Perkins. They wouldn't let me buy out. And then I shipped it in their face. And the funny thing is, like, I had $600K to win $100K on it, but Dan and Bill were so confident on their side. They bet like over $1 million versus other people. And like a lot of them were my friends who were like, yo, like this might, like they didn't really know some of the stuff the coach had said, but they were like, Brian's kind of crazy when he tries to do something. So like, we're going to bet on Brian. And so, I ended up shipping, over $1 million at least for other people. Like Antonio won almost as much as I did. And I think some other people who bet on me. And they didn't even get 6-1 odds. Like their odds were a little worse, but
wow. Oh my God. I mean, I'm huge into cycling, which is obviously different. I've never done more than 100 miles in one day, but that's just insane. And I remember watching the video and following that in real time as it was happening and thinking you were a total crazy person, which you are for completing it, but it's still an insane accomplishment. By the way, let's not get sidetracked by the fact that Seiver spiked the 8 against your pocket kings here.
Yes. I ended up getting lucky shortly after this, but like this was a hand. I was the chip leader and Seiver had a little bit less than me and Connor was like a nub. Like literally I win this pot 82% of the time or whatever, and the tournament's like over. I mean, Connor's got a little nub down there. I would have had, I mean, it'd be nice to look at the chips, but he'd have like 5 to 10% of my stack. So Seiver wins this, and now I have about the same what Connor had, and Seiver's got a huge chip lead, which Seiver takes the chip lead into the finals.
Right. So now we're still three-handed with Connor and Brian with similar stack sizes. I'm sure we'll get to see the stack sizes again.
So this is one of the best. Like, this is how I knew I was super. Like, I know I'm super focused here because basically I took that bad beat. It's a pretty big bad beat. I mean, even if you think literally pocket eights, the magic hand, literally run it back and bank with the eights. But it's like, I mean, that's a huge. Imagine it was 7.5 for first. Forget what third is. The actual equity on that hand, right, is millions of dollars. Because I'm like 95% to get first if I win. And now I'm like, whatever my equity is, probably lower than second place money. That was millions of dollars on an 82%. Like that was a beat. That beat in equity cost me at least $1 million.
Let's listen.
Right?
Let's listen into the commentary and your commentary at the table during this showdown.
For Rast, he's going to need to get just as lucky as Scott did with his eights.
Big showdown here. The winner
Rast
basically
isn't
gets
the
to go
shorter
heads
stack,
up with
so he's not at
Seiver.
risk. But if he does lose this, he'll be down to fewer than 6 big blinds. 3, 3, 4 on the flop.
And that is no help to Rast. He needs an 8 and an 8 only.
But I was locked in here going into this.
Boom. Eights are not lucky for Connor Drynan.
And eights are the hand. Just maybe.
But yeah, no, it's
Only a queen will save Connor.
I mean, there were a few, not a lot of time, but there was like a little bit of, there were some hands in between there. And I just remember, and I think even Antonio told me after I took that beat, I just, like, didn't get upset at all. Just like sat down and kept playing poker. I mean, that was kind of a cooler hand too, given our stack sizes, like button open or something and ship and call, whatever it was. Like we weren't that deep, but yeah, it's how tournaments go. You know what I mean? What does he say? Can we?
Yeah, for sure. We can listen.
Heartbreaking 2 pocket eights hands.
I mean, they were both pretty expensive eights for me, but I ran well to get there. I got really lucky in against David Peters earlier, so I'm still happy with third. Just, could have been a little bit more.
Yeah, he's got to be a little tilted because the eights hand that was obviously awful for me was pretty damn bad for him too. He's like a short stack in third and basically a chance for me to knock him. He just like moves up to second. Like a pretty sick move up. And, Seiver hits the 8 on me. Yeah, Seiver has more than 2-1 on me on chips to start.
I mean,
what a huge hand for what a huge 8 for Seiver.
Maybe the high stakes duel should be you against Seiver, the rematch. That would be fun to watch.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Picking up two massive hands here during heads up play.
There's people I'd probably rather play than Scott.
I bet. Let's see.
Yeah, this is a pretty big pot. I was actually pretty happy with the way I played against Seiver. I mean, it was a small sample size, but I had at least one like light 3-bet they don't show that kind of like made it through. I felt very good about the way I played versus Scott. And Scott has more heads up experience than me. Scott had played a fair amount of heads up online. Now at this point, I had actually kind of stealth. Most people didn't know, but I had been playing some like hyper sit and goes I think a year or two before this as a way to work on my ICM and a lot of these shorthanded spots. Because, as I said, I came from a cash game background, but so doing a lot of that and working on the ICM. I was actually winning. I was winning playing some of the bigger sit and goes on stars at the time. Not that I put in a ton of volume, but it was like 1K or more hands or something. So yeah, that's a interesting turn card.
Yeah, giving Seiver some equity added to his gut shot with the flush draw. However, he does not know that that flush draw is dead because you have the higher spade. So this
was an interesting hand that I play a little weird. I check raise, bet, and then check river. The check river was something I was doing specifically versus Seiver at that moment because I had felt like, I play a lot against Scott, so I don't really want to get into it. I just thought that the check would have been slightly better on the river. And, he value bets the queen of spades, so a spade hits, so it doesn't end up being a big deal. But I kind of thought it was a spot where basically versus me at the time, Scott would value bet at least as light as he was called, plus I get some hands he might turn into bluffs.
Right.
Which was kind of the idea. So this hand doesn't prove anything, but I like this play versus Scott here. It was an exploitive move.
Yeah, and Scott makes the lower flush on the river, but still, given the fact that you guys are playing heads up, this is still a massive, massive hand, the queen high flush. Any player would love to have a queen high flush playing heads up, and then Scott, of course, runs into your king high flush. So let's see what size he goes for. All in.
Shove by Scott.
I call.
Quick call by Rast.
Wow.
That's made Rast's rail very happy.
That was a
that was a big pot. We basically kind of flipped positions, and now I have the chip lead.
Right. Yeah, that's massive. Yeah, now you got 62% of the chips, which clearly makes a massive, massive difference, which is awesome. Before we get to the final hand of the tournament, I saw a question earlier about Phil Ivey stories, which is a recurring theme here on the show. Ivey stories are always funny to hear. Do you have an Ivey story? Do you and Ivey have some history? Maybe a hand you played, or maybe some kind of moment?
I don't know if I've ever played like a huge hand versus Ivey, so to speak. We definitely have history. I've played with Phil in a number of tournaments. I played with him in Bobby's room quite a bit. I've even hung out with Phil away from the table probably more than most. Phil has a recording studio. He has some artists. Like, I've been to his recording studio. I've gone out with him before and had some drinks. Nothing to speak of. Phil's a cool, interesting dude who's intelligent. It's fun to talk about stuff. Obviously loves gambling. Yeah, I don't know. I like Phil. No like, oh, crazy Phil Ivey stories. There's a bunch of amazing Phil Ivey stories out there from time to time, but I don't have anything to add to that. There's the one with the Nick Schulman and tipping the massage.
Yeah.
Person like 5K, like, oh, Phil, like, I don't have anything tipper for me, and like Phil throws her like 5 or 10K. It was like, for Nick, just like, Phil's just like a funny guy. He's got a good sense of humor. He's smart, and I like Phil.
Yeah, he's a legend for sure. Here's the aces for yourself against Seiver, who makes middle pair. He gives it up. You pick up another pot to extend your chip lead here in the heads-up stages of the 2015 Super High Roller Bowl. Let me say it once again for the people who are tuning in late. We are breaking down this entire final table. We've heard some great stories from Brian earlier on the show. He told the story of the biggest pot he ever played, over $3 million. So go back and check that out if you missed it. And also don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me also mention that this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, I'm going to have Kristen Bicknell on this very show. We're going to watch her Poker Masters win from last year, so that's going to be a good raises it up with the fives.
Something about Phil too is Phil's pretty much always. It's funny, you play poker, especially in Bobby's room. There's a lot of I mean, Bobby's room drives a lot of people crazy. First, a lot of the people in the game are whatever, fringe personality this, autistic that, anger this, whatever, blow ups at the table. Literally never seen Phil get really upset at the table. He's almost always like a gentleman. Maybe he's sarcastic from time to time or whatever, but yeah, Phil has amazing composure. Like for sure. One of the best behaved dudes in Bobby's room, which is full of a lot of people who can be crazy from time to time, including me. I've not that I'm a big blower up, but I've gotten really pissed at one or two people there. It's happened. Haven't seen it from Phil.
That's good. All right, here we have it. All in, ace-9 suited against pocket fives.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
Seiver's hand is ahead, but he has the smaller chip stack, so he is at risk.
And for Brian, this is a chance to get vengeance. He had him in the spot already once, and this time if he wins the whole tournament. $7.5 million, a shiny ring.
And Rast outflopped Seiver.
Flop.
Beautiful for you.
I think I was just deep enough here where ace-9 suited starts to get a little iffy for the 3-bet call off, but I had actually, they don't really show up, but I had 3-bet Scott a number of times. I mean, there was the hand with aces or ace-king, but then there were like two hands they didn't even show, which were essentially light 3-bets that he folded. I mean, it's one of those things where everything was working out because it was like the two hands that he called, I had big hands, and the ace-king, I hit the flop. But then there were like two times I had, basically I was bluffing, or I had weak hands. Bluffing is a pre-flop. It's kind of hard to say that. But I had weak hands, and he folds. So, things were going right, but I had been aggressive pre-flop. And given our stack sizes, I had just kind of decided with ace-9 suited that not only would I 3-bet it for value here, but that I was going to call off if he shoved. Because I thought, maybe he would, do it. Not only he would be willing to do it with some hands in order to fight back, like, say, queen-jack suited, stuff like that. Not that he's doing it with total air, but.
Right, and it all worked out, and you are the champion. You have the ring and $7.5 million, which really vaulted you up the all-time money list. That list, is it anything you care about? Antonio held number one for a while after he won the one drop. Does it matter to you where you sit on that list? I know you don't play tournaments anymore, so clearly nowadays it doesn't much, but before?
Yeah, I mean, when I was playing tournaments, that list was definitely a way to keep score. It's not like you'd look at the list and be like, well, this is the list of the best players in order. But that was a way to keep score. It was kind of obviously the higher up on that list. I mean, that list is something public. So, a lot of the top guys probably have opinions about who is playing the best, but the public doesn't know anything about that. Because poker is something more than almost any other kind of sport or competitive activity where you don't really know who's kind of playing the best. If you're on the outside, who actually is playing the best poker. I mean, there is some tie into results, but somebody could be amazing and they're not going to have the most money won until they've been around for a while. Right. So it's you don't know from the outside. So poker is very much like that. So, but that list was something that was kind of okay, there's a lot of recognition and notoriety with being high on the list. So when I was playing tournaments, I paid attention and I cared. But yeah, it's once I stopped playing tournaments, it kind of was well, I just going to have to accept the fact at this point that just like some people who got on the list were above me before and quit, and I had been catching up and passing. Now I was going to be one of those people who I was high on the list, but I'm not playing any tournaments. So there's going to be a bunch of these guys who get results and pass. And I even knew it was going to happen even faster because it's in the last few years prior to COVID, the year maybe it had been 2 years. So I maybe haven't been playing tournaments for kind of 3 years now, but for a year and a half or 2 years before COVID, the amount of money and buy-ins the top guys were doing was pretty insane. Guys were doing, 5+ up to 10 million a year if they were really hardworking travelers. That was putting to shame stuff from, when I was playing a lot of tournaments 5 years ago, so even guys who are playing a bunch of buy-ins, like if you won 3 million in a year, like you might not even be winning.
Right.
Whereas like if you go back 5 years ago, like when I was doing it, it's like impossible if you had a 3 million year that you wouldn't have won. Like that'd be a good year.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. So, I mean, that list is going to get even, like when we come back, if it stays the way it is, I'm going to get left in the dust. Like already, like I think Bryn Kenny or Justin is up there and like their numbers smashing, Antonio, and then he had gotten past, and because now there's just so many big buy-ins, like the guys who are good and run good and hit the big stuff, like, they're going to put up big numbers.
Yeah, you were 10th on the all-time money list. You're down to 25th, and like you said, these guys are putting in millions and millions of dollars. It's Bryn right now at number 1 with 56 million. I think we're not too far away from someone breaking 100 million after a few crazy runs and scores. Brian, thank you so much for being on the show. I truly appreciate it. It was great breaking this final table down. For everyone watching, if you want to watch any Super High Roller Bowl or any other season of High Stakes Poker or Poker After Dark, don't forget to subscribe to PokerGO. It is all available right there. And stay tuned for round 3 of high stakes duel between Phil Hellmuth and Antonio Asfandiari. The 400K match is coming up in October, so don't miss that.
You know what I'm ready for, Remco?
Tell me.
I might not be on there for the tournaments on PokerGO going forward so much, the No Limit Hold'em, but I'm ready. We can do another like Bobby's Room or cash mix game, because that's what I'm playing nowadays. So I would love to be on there, have a good time. Hear Nick in the booth. Nick would probably want to play, but Nick, who does an amazing job of commentary, I heard a lot of people talking about him with the Antonio and Phil. He would be amazing to commentate that, because Nick comes and plays in the Bobby's Room game, so he knows everybody in there intimately in a way that he doesn't know the tournament guys quite as much. So, I mean, that would be a pretty cool show for everybody. If we saw like me, Doyle, Gus, and I know Nick would want to play, but if they could convince Nick to stay in the booth and do it, that would be a fun show for sure.
We'd love to have the Bobby's Room guys back in the studio. That'd be amazing. For Brian Rast, my name is Remco Rinkema. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Thursday, mark your calendars, 8 p.m. Eastern. Kristen Bicknell joins me on the show, watching some Poker Masters. Up until then, catch you guys later.